of the bands from 80s and 90s and 70s, like the STUNS, and the 60s, like the STUNS, it's like you don't really think about that so much because you're.
At 74, Mick Mars shocks fans with a surprising revelation about Mötley Crüe. The legendary guitarist opens up about secrets from the band's past and what really happened behind the scenes. What did he finally reveal? Is this the truth fans never knew? Join us as we break it all down in simple terms today for everyone watching right now. The musical rise of Robert Allen Deal. Robert Allen Deal was born in the year 1951. Much later in life, he became widely known as Mick Mars. However, long before this name became famous, his life was already deeply affected by a serious health condition known as ankylosing spondylitis. This is a chronic inflammatory disease that targets the spine. Over time, it reduces flexibility and slowly causes the vertebrae in the spine to fuse together. It does not happen suddenly. Instead, it develops slowly and steadily, creating long-term physical limitations. For Mars, this condition meant that pain was present in his life even before any form of fame or public recognition. The discomfort was not occasional, but constant. As he grew into adulthood, the disease had already started shaping his physical movement and overall posture. His body became noticeably rigid. His movements were careful, controlled, and less flexible compared to others. Even with these physical challenges, he did not leave his passion for music behind. During the 1970s, Mars remained active in California's club circuit. This was a time when many small music venues across California provided stages for emerging musicians. He performed in this environment for almost 2 decades. Throughout this period, he moved through different band lineups and joined several lesser-known groups. Some of these included White Horse and other short-lived musical projects that did not reach mainstream success or wide public attention. These years were repetitive and challenging, but they played an important role in shaping his musical identity. Over time, Mars developed a very disciplined and focused approach to playing the guitar. His style became carefully structured, almost precise in its execution. He built a sound that was dark and rooted in blues influences. His guitar tone often featured strong sustain and layered distortion. This sound was not only a creative decision, but was also influenced by his physical limitations. Unlike many guitarists of the late 1970s rock scene, Mars did not focus on flashy or overly theatrical performance styles. He was not known for flamboyant movements or exaggerated stage behavior. Instead, his playing style emphasized weight, depth, and control. His music carried a heavy and steady presence rather than rapid display or visual excess. A major turning point in his career came in 1981. During this year, he co-founded the band Mötley Crüe. The group was formed in Los Angeles, California. At that time, the Sunset Strip music scene was crowded with many rising hard rock bands competing for attention and success. Each group was trying to build a strong identity in a very competitive environment. The original members of the band included Nikki Sixx, Tommy Lee, and later Vince Neil. While the other members often focused on visual energy, chaotic stage presence, and strong media attention, Mick Mars played a different but very important role. He became the musical anchor of the group. His guitar work provided structure and stability to the band's overall sound. He also contributed to the creation of the band's name, Mötley Crüe. The name was inspired by an earlier phrase used in discussions that referred to a mixed or motley-looking group of people. As Mötley Crüe began recording music and performing more widely, Mars's role became even more focused on studio work rather than public performance spectacle. His guitar playing formed the base of many early recordings that would later become important in the development of glam metal music. In 1981, the band released Too Fast for Love. This album introduced a raw and aggressive sound. It reflected both the chaotic energy of the group and the structured musical foundation provided by Mars. The album helped establish their early identity in the rock scene. Over the following years, the band experienced rapid growth and increasing success. In 1983, they released Shout at the Devil. In 1985, they followed with Theater of Pain. Later, in 1989, they released Dr. Feelgood. These albums contributed to their rise to global recognition. Together, they sold tens of millions of records around the world, making the band one of the most successful rock acts of their time. Despite this global success, Mick Mars remained the least visually prominent member of the group. His presence was not defined by stage theatrics or media attention, but by his consistent and powerful guitar contributions that shaped the band's sound throughout its rise. The turning point in Mötley Crüe's live era. By the time Mötley Crüe had already established themselves as global heavyweights in rock music, the physical condition of guitarist Mick Mars was becoming harder to ignore. Behind the strong stage presence and consistent performances, Mars was dealing with a serious long-term health condition that affected his body in a major way. Mick Mars had been living with ankylosing spondylitis since the 1980s and 1990s. This condition is known for gradually affecting the spine, reducing flexibility, and causing ongoing physical discomfort over time. Even while dealing with this illness, Mars continued to perform as Mötley Crüe toured heavily across North America, Europe, and Japan. These tours often took place in large arenas filled with tens of thousands of fans, requiring intense performance schedules and constant travel. The physical demands of this lifestyle added even more pressure to his condition. Continuous touring involved long flights, late-night performances, frequent stage setups, and tightly scheduled tour legs one after another. All of these factors combined to make his medical condition more difficult to manage. Ankylosing spondylitis is progressive, meaning it becomes more limiting over time. For Mars, this gradual progression meant that even basic movement on stage became increasingly difficult and required careful adjustments in how he performed. As the early 2000s arrived, it became clear that medical intervention was necessary. In 2004, Mick Mars underwent major spinal surgery. This was not a simple or minor procedure. It involved the implantation of metal hardware in his spine to help stabilize it and support his movement. This surgery marked a major turning point in his life and career. While it did not end his ability to perform, it placed clear physical limits on what he could do on stage moving forward. After the surgery, Mars required ongoing pain management and had to adjust his posture significantly. Unlike earlier years, where he could move more freely across the stage, he often performed in a more fixed position. His movement became controlled and limited, especially compared to his bandmates. Even with these restrictions, he continued to perform and remain active in live shows. Despite these physical challenges, Mars continued touring with Mötley Crüe for many years after his surgery. He took part in major reunion tours and large festival circuits during the 2000s and 2010s. These events attracted massive global audiences and required high levels of performance energy from all members of the band. The tours were physically demanding, even for performers without medical conditions, as they included long sets, repeated rehearsals, and fast-paced travel between cities and countries. For Mick Mars, every performance required careful management of pain levels in real time. He still had to deliver precise guitar work while dealing with ongoing physical discomfort. As the 2010s progressed, the strain on his body became more noticeable. Ankylosing spondylitis is a degenerative condition, meaning it continues to affect the body over time. Spinal stiffness increased, joint inflammation became more challenging, and fatigue levels also grew higher. His mobility was more limited, and movement on stage became more difficult compared to earlier decades. Even though he maintained accuracy in his guitar playing, the physical toll of touring started to overshadow the overall experience of performing. At the same time, the environment of Mötley Crüe's tours had also changed significantly. Production sizes became larger, schedules became tighter, and performance expectations remained extremely high. This was happening even as the band members grew older and faced their own physical limitations. This difference between modern touring demands and Mars's health condition created a growing imbalance within the live performance structure. Over time, this imbalance became increasingly difficult to maintain without adjustments. Eventually, after many years of managing his condition through surgery, treatment, and continuous adaptation, Mick Mars reached a major breaking point. In October 2022, a key change in the band's history took place. Mick Mars officially announced that he would no longer participate in touring with Mötley Crüe. This decision was directly connected to the progression of his ankylosing spondylitis. After years of continuing to perform through pain, reduced movement, and physical limitations on stage, the demands of global touring had become too much for his body to handle safely and sustainably. However, this announcement did not completely end his connection with the band. Mars made it clear that his decision was focused only on touring and live performances. It did not automatically remove him from the broader business, history, or legacy aspects of Mötley Crüe. This distinction was important because Mötley Crüe functions not only as a live performing band, but also as a long-standing commercial music entity. The group's structure includes recorded music, branding, and long-term legacy management built over decades. Following the announcement, the band confirmed that guitarist John Five, whose real name is John William Lowery, and who is known for his work with Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie, would replace Mars for touring purposes. His appointment was made ahead of major international tour commitments, including large stadium performances. These shows were part of a continued global touring phase alongside Def Leppard in their co-headlining tours. This transition allowed Mötley Crüe to continue their live performances without interruption. It also marked a major moment in the band's history. For the first time in over 40 years, the group was performing major tours without its original guitarist. Since their formation in 1981, Mick Mars had remained the consistent instrumental foundation of Mötley Crüe through all lineup changes, studio periods, breakups, and reunions. His role was central to the band's identity across multiple decades of music production and touring. Reactions from fans and industry observers came quickly. Some viewed the change as a natural outcome of long-term health challenges that had been visible for years. Mars's spinal condition and reduced stage mobility had been noticeable in later performances, making the decision understandable from a medical perspective. Others saw it as part of a wider shift in how long-standing rock bands evolve, where original members gradually step back, while the band continues to operate as a major commercial and touring brand. However, for Mick Mars himself, the situation did not end there. Legal dispute over ownership and financial rights. In early 2023, Mick Mars, a founding member of Mötley Crüe, took legal action against his former bandmates. The case was filed in April 2023 at the Los Angeles County Superior Court. The dispute focused on serious claims about his role in the band's business structure and how his financial and decision-making rights were handled after he stepped back from touring. Mars argued that he had been significantly reduced in terms of financial participation within the band's corporate setup. He also claimed that his authority in making decisions had been limited. At the center of the case was profit distribution. Mars questioned whether his ownership share and royalty earnings had been changed without his full agreement. He maintained that he still held an important stake in the Mötley Crüe business entity. He further stated that even after deciding to stop touring, he never gave up his ownership role in the band's internal structure. His position was that performing live on stage is separate from being a legal owner of the band's business rights. He emphasized that he helped form the band in 1981, and this long-term involvement supported his claim to continued ownership and influence. Mars also challenged how business decisions were being made after his reduced touring involvement. These included choices related to live tours, use of the band's brand, and contract negotiations connected to performances. He argued that stepping away from touring should not automatically remove him from decisions tied to the band's overall business operations. The response from the remaining members of Mötley Crüe was firm. They denied any wrongdoing in how they handled the situation. Their explanation focused on Mars's declining physical condition and how it affected his ability to perform live. They pointed to ankylosing spondylitis, a serious degenerative spinal condition he has dealt with for many years. He had major surgery in 2004, and over time, his mobility became more limited. The band explained that adjustments to touring and related business arrangements were made based on practical needs. They said these changes were not intended to exclude Mars unfairly, but were necessary for live performance operations. According to their position, the restructuring was about functionality on stage rather than removing his overall value or history in the group. As legal documents and responses became public, the dispute quickly moved beyond a private disagreement. It became a widely reported entertainment industry case. Major media outlets including Rolling Stone, Billboard, and Variety covered the situation closely. Much of the attention centered on the contrast between Mars, as a founding creative member, and the band's argument that his live performance limitations required operational adjustments. The case also highlighted an important legal issue in music partnerships like Mötley Crüe. Courts do not focus on fame, legacy, or public image. Instead, they focus on contracts, ownership percentages, and legal responsibilities between partners. If a member has an official ownership share in a band's corporate structure, that share generally cannot be reduced without clear agreement or proper contractual authority. Under California law, which applied to this case, business partners have strict duties toward each other. One partner cannot simply reduce another partner's share or remove decision-making power if that person still legally owns part of the business. This principle became very important in Mars's claims. A major point in the case was whether stepping back from touring automatically affects ownership rights. Mars argued that it does not. He claimed that even though he stopped performing live, his ownership and voting rights should remain intact. He believed changes made to his financial position and influence were done without proper authorization. The band disagreed, stating that the reality of live performance required changes. They argued that because Mars could no longer fully participate in touring, adjustments to revenue and structure were necessary. This raised a broader business question about how income is divided when live performance becomes the main source of earnings, compared to music catalog and branding rights. In many such cases, this difference becomes central. If most income comes from touring, restructuring is often justified. If income is based on ownership of music rights and branding, reducing a founding member's share becomes much harder to defend legally. The legal dispute did not reach a public courtroom conclusion. Instead, in 2024, both sides agreed to a private settlement. The terms of the agreement were not made public. This means details about financial outcomes, ownership changes, or internal governance were never officially disclosed. Private settlements like this are common in high-profile music industry disputes. They allow both sides to avoid long court battles and also prevent sensitive financial and contractual details from becoming public knowledge. The case also received strong reactions from within the rock music community. Several industry figures expressed support for Mick Mars. Dee Snider criticized the situation, describing it as unfair treatment of a founding member. Tracy Guns also commented that the situation appeared to be a business decision that may not sit well with fans. Eddie Trunk added that Mars had been one of the most consistent musicians in the band and questioned how a founding member could be sidelined in such a way. To fully understand why this case drew so much attention, it is important to recognize Mötley Crüe's long internal history and the role Mick Mars played in building the band from its early years. The internal struggles of Mötley Crüe. By the mid-'80s, Mötley Crüe had already reached global dominance in the rock music world. Their fame was strong and widespread. But inside the band, the structure holding everything together was under constant pressure and strain. Success on the outside did not match stability on the inside. In December of 1987, Nikki Sixx experienced a serious overdose in Los Angeles. During this emergency, responders declared him clinically dead for approximately 2 minutes before he was revived using adrenaline injections. This moment was not only a personal medical emergency for Sixx, but also a clear sign of the direction the band was heading at that time. Sixx later described that period as one marked by a total loss of control. It reflected how unstable life around the band had become. At the same time, Tommy Lee was dealing with legal troubles and highly public personal relationships. These issues kept him constantly in the media spotlight. Instead of the attention focusing on the band's music and performances, it often shifted toward his offstage life. His arrests, public altercations, and constant tabloid coverage created a repeating pattern where the band's image was shaped more by controversy than by their musical output. This cycle continued to pull attention away from their work. However, the most serious legal and moral incident in the band's history took place earlier, on December 8, 1984. Vince Neil was driving under the influence in Redondo Beach, California, when his car collided with another vehicle. This crash resulted in the death of Nicholas Razzle Dingley. Following the incident, Vince Neil was charged, served jail time, and received probation along with financial restitution. This event had a permanent impact on the band's public reputation and also affected their internal relationships. It introduced a level of seriousness that went far beyond typical rock and roll behavior, forcing the group to face real and lasting consequences. During all of this instability, Mick Mars remained the most consistent and least volatile member of the band. While other members were regularly involved in addiction struggles, legal issues, and public controversies, Mars stayed mostly away from headlines of that nature. Within recording environments, especially in the late 1980s, producers and engineers often observed that he was the only member consistently prepared and ready to record his parts without delay or disruption. A major turning point came when the band entered rehabilitation together before recording their album Dr. Feelgood in 1989. This was the first time all four members were sober during a recording process. The result was their most commercially successful album, which sold over 6 million copies in the United States alone. Mick Mars played a central role in this success. His tight and controlled guitar work formed the foundation of the album's sound, helping to hold together a band that had previously struggled with consistency in the studio. Despite this success, the instability did not fully disappear in the 1990s. In 1992, Vince Neil was fired from the band due to internal disagreements related to commitment and performance. This decision created a major shift and forced the group into a risky transition. They brought in John Corabi as the new lead vocalist and released a self-titled album in 1994. Although this album received positive critical reviews, it did not achieve the same commercial success as their earlier work. This period revealed a deeper issue within the band. Without the original lineup, their identity became less stable and more divided. Through all of this, Mick Mars continued to remain present, contributing to the band's sound even as their commercial performance declined. In 1997, Vince Neil returned to the band, restoring the original lineup. However, this reunion did not remove the tension that had built up over the years. Behind the scenes, problems continued in the form of contractual disagreements and financial disputes. Issues related to touring income, publishing rights, and branding decisions repeatedly caused conflict among members. As the band's back catalog grew in value, these disputes became even more frequent and complicated. In 2001, the release of their autobiography, The Dirt, exposed much of this internal history. It detailed not only their well-known excesses, but also the repeated breakdowns that nearly caused the band to end multiple times. Later, in 2019, this story was adapted into a Netflix film, bringing their history to a new global audience and reinforcing how complex their journey had been. Even with all these challenges and moments that seemed final at different points, the band's ending never truly became permanent. Shift from touring legacy to solo independence. In the year 2015, the band made a major legal decision that changed their future completely. They signed a legally binding agreement that officially ended their touring career. This agreement was known as a cessation of touring contract. It clearly stated that they would not go on tour again after this point. Their final performance under this agreement happened on December 31st in Los Angeles. That show was presented to the public as their last live performance together. This contract was very unusual in the music industry. Most bands do not create legal agreements that permanently stop future reunions or tours. It was designed to close the chapter of live performances for good and prevent the band from coming back together for touring again in the future. However, this decision did not remain permanent. By the year 2019, the agreement was no longer active in practice. The band returned to the stage for a large stadium tour. This tour was highly successful financially and featured Def Leppard as a touring partner. The return showed that even with earlier legal plans to stop touring, the demand and business potential for live performances remained strong. Across all these changes, Mick Mars stayed a steady and important part of the band's identity. His role was not focused on controlling publicity or shaping public stories. Instead, he focused on protecting the musical foundation that made the band recognizable and successful from the beginning. While other members often attracted media attention and headlines, Mars remained focused on the sound itself. His guitar work helped maintain consistency in the band's music, even during periods of internal change and uncertainty. His riffs created a sense of continuity that held the group's identity together over many years. Because of this, the band was able to rebuild itself multiple times while still keeping a familiar musical core. At different points, he was sidelined in certain ways, but he continued to contribute through his music. He did not allow these challenges to completely stop his involvement or define the end of his career with the band. In the year 2024, after more than 40 years as a founding guitarist of Mötley Crüe, Mick Mars released his first solo album titled The Other Side of Mars. This project marked a major personal and professional shift. It was his first significant independent release outside the structure of the band that had defined most of his career. The recording process for this album was intentionally different from his past work. Instead of relying on a touring-based band identity, Mars focused on studio collaboration. The project was carefully built in a controlled studio environment, allowing for a more detailed and flexible creative process. He worked with several experienced professionals in the music industry. One of them was producer Michael Wagoner, who is well known for his engineering work with major rock and metal artists such as Metallica and Ozzy Osbourne. The project also included skilled musicians like keyboardist Paul Taylor, drummer Ray Luzier from Korn, and vocalist Jacob Bunton. This lineup showed that the album was not a casual side project, but a serious and structured musical work created with professional intent. The sound of The Other Side of Mars was very different from the classic glam metal style that made Mötley Crüe popular in the 1980s. Instead, the album explored heavier and more modern sound directions. It included industrial rock elements, grunge-style distortion, and darker layers of production. The guitar remained an important part of the music, but the focus was not on flashy or highly energetic arena-style performance. Instead, the production created a deeper and more atmospheric sound. It emphasized mood, weight, and texture rather than traditional glam rock energy. Songs such as Loyal to the Lie and Killing Breed reflected strong emotional themes. These included tension, resistance, and internal struggle. The overall tone of the album was more reflective and thoughtful rather than nostalgic or focused on repeating past success. Critics responded mainly to this change in style. Many music reviewers noted that Mick Mars did not try to recreate the sound of his earlier career. Instead, he built something new that reflected his personal growth and experience over time. They highlighted how different the production was compared to the straightforward hard rock style of Mötley Crüe's most famous years. Rather than viewing the album as an extension of the band's legacy, it was described as a reinvention. It showed artistic independence and a willingness to move in a new direction. One important detail about this release was that Mick Mars did not plan to tour the album. He explained publicly that his health conditions made live touring difficult and not practical. Because of this, the album exists as a studio-only project. Even without touring, he remained active in the creative process. He continued writing, recording, and experimenting with sound in the studio environment. He often described the studio as his main place for creativity and focus. In both commercial and symbolic terms, this solo album marked a clear separation from the long-standing structure of Mötley Crüe. While the band's history remains tied to decades of shared success, The Other Side of Mars placed Mick Mars in a new position as an independent artist. This shift was not only about releasing music alone, it also represented control over creative direction, collaboration choices, and production style. It removed the limits of touring schedules and band branding expectations, giving him full space to focus on studio work. In conclusion, this journey shows a long evolution from structured band agreements and major tours to a personal and independent creative path. It reflects both continuity in musical contribution and change in artistic direction. Well, that is it for now. Thank you for reading. If you enjoyed this, you may continue exploring more related content and stay connected for future updates.